Welcome to the exciting tour of World War II, where Adolf Hitler plays a leading role. Join us on this journey through the events that led 1930s Europe into the chaos of war, as we examine the crucial role Hitler played in this dramatic chapter for humanity. In this video, we will explore the charismatic leader's rise to power and his impact on one of the most devastating conflicts in history.
When Hitler triumphed in the summer of 1940, acclaimed by the Germans, his people considered him an infallible genius, endowed with exceptional intelligence. However, this is a completely invented image. The myth of Hitler that is sold to Germans is that of a leader who knows everything and who works, and is not the opposite of reality. Hitler is an amateur. In reality, he does not work and has never worked. In fact, Hitler likes to retreat to the refuge of it, like an artist who floats above reality. A handful of collaborators work in his place. His names are Joseph Goebbels, Heinrich Himmler, or Albert Speer. It took Hitler more than 15 years to recruit them. Who are these men who stand in Hitler's shadow? What is the role of each of them? Around the leader, there is a wide network of collaborators. First, there is the inner circle. Only they have direct access to it. Among these faithful, a central trio is formed, whose main character is Hermann Göring. He is an ogre who only thinks about getting rich, ambitious, opportunistic, drug addict. He loves luxury and extravagance. The second is Joseph Goebbels, a failed writer. His limp makes him feel self-conscious, and he retaliates by projecting extreme hatred. He lives by and for his idol, Hitler. The third, Heinrich Himmler, is a petty bourgeois, cold, stubborn, and meticulous. An affable man who will become the murderer of the century by organizing what the Nazis call the final solution. The second circle is made up of younger, more ambitious men who join Hitler in the 1930s when he rises to power and distributes ministerial portfolios. Among them, Albert Speer will rise to the top. Under the guise of a distinguished architect, he is in fact a great manipulator who shares Hitler's megalomaniac dreams and will do anything to become his favorite. Finally, in the outer circle are the men who carry out the orders, the officials of the Third Reich, who commit the crimes and atrocities such as Rudolf Hess, the director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, a cold and haughty man. This family man who lives with his wife, those 5 children, in a house in front of the concentration camp, will organize the extermination of 1,100,000 people. And next to him, Dr. Joseph Mengele, the person in charge of medical experiments, embodies Nazi cruelty. Without compassion for his victims, this SS doctor will carry out the most atrocious mutilations in concentration camps, even on children. Without these men, the worst crimes would not have been possible. To please Hitler, they compete in cruelty. Hitler, still unknown, will recruit his accomplices at the beginning of the 1920s in a troubled Germany. The country, defeated in the First World War, has an army of only 100,000 men. Therefore, everywhere, former soldiers form mercenary groups. The country is afraid of falling into a civil war. In this parade, a small group from southern Germany has chosen brutality as a symbol. It is called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP. Founded in Munich, this small party interests workers and the unemployed. In the first row of spectators, Hitler, who had been an army employee for 30 years, is not yet the leader of the party. He is only the 55th member. This veteran of the First World War has known combat on the front, with the rank of a simple corporal. After Germany's defeat, his only thought is to avenge his country. Hitler quickly assumes leadership of the small party, giving speeches in the beer halls of Munich. He denounces the humiliations suffered by his country, but his means remain very limited. Located in the back room of this brewery, it is in his first office. He writes his speeches at this table. To gain a wider audience, Hitler needs more prestigious representatives. So, in the fall of 1922, When an important figure comes to listen to him, he feels that he has found an ideal candidate. The new recruit is a handsome man. German Goering, 27, was a fighter pilot in the Great War, in aerial combat. He shot down 21 planes. German Goering has even been decorated for his bravery with the Cross of Merit, the highest distinction in the army. After the war, when the German military aviation is disbanded, he is left without a job. But in Hitler's eyes, Goering is interesting for other reasons. He has friends in important positions. Those in aviation, he had married a rich woman. Karin von Fock comes from Swedish nobility. They had met at the family castle near Stockholm. The couple is related to the aristocracy, and Hitler needs donors to finance his little movement. As soon as he joins the party, Goering is promoted to head of the armed militia, called SA. Before a year has passed, Munich, the Nazi party, attempts to seize power through a coup d'etat. During the coup in November 1923, gunfights break out between the Nazis and the police. There are 16 dead. For the Nazis, it is a total failure. Hitler is imprisoned for 8 months in the Landsberg prison fortress. His party dissolves. In his cell, he writes Mein Kampf, in Spanish, My Fight. Suffering from serious gunshot wounds, Goering flees. His presence on German territory is prohibited. He has to have surgery, and they treat him with morphine to relieve pain. He becomes the day of death. He has to have surgery and is treated with morphine to relieve the pain. He becomes addicted to the drug. Goering takes refuge in Stockholm, in the country of his wife. Without a profession and without a future, he suffers attacks of violence. Goering spends several seasons in this psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of Stockholm. According to his confidential medical report, he has been admitted for morphine poisoning. Goering is described as suicidal and self-centered. He attributes his mental problems to the fact of seeing himself politically dead. But the following year, it is reborn from its ashes. Thanks to the presidential election of 1925, an amnesty is proclaimed, and he is allowed to re-enter Germany. Without his Führer, Goering is nothing. He hopes to regain his position in the party, but he is no longer on the same page with Hitler. Goering then reminds Hitler of his services. Hitler needs loyal men and finds a new position for him. Goering will no longer fight in the streets, he will do so in the great halls, fighting to regain his rank. And he achieves it in 1928, when he enters the Reichstag, the German parliament elected among the first 12 Nazi deputies. In 1932, he became president of said assembly. The second accomplice that Hitler recruits sees his career in Nazism take off at the age of 29. Hitler begins by entrusting Joseph Goebbels with a very delicate mission. He sends him to Berlin, the capital of Germany. With 4 million inhabitants, it is the largest city in Europe at the time. It is made up of large suburbs full of workers. They nickname it Red Berlin, since the communists have turned it into their stronghold. Hitler entrusts this little lame man with a great challenge, to turn the Nazis into the first political force in Berlin. He knows that he can ask Goebbels anything. Goebbels owes everything to Hitler, since until they met, his life had been nothing more than a succession of failures. As a result of an illness that he suffered in his childhood, Goebbels is left lame in one leg, and this embarrasses him. During the First World War, he dreams of becoming a soldier. To explain his disability, Hitler asks Goebbels to become a ability prefers to lie. Literature professor at the university and unsuccessful writer, he finds a job that lives up to his ambitions. Goebbels works 9 months as an employee bank and ends up leaving it. Only Hitler gives meaning to his life. Upon his arrival in Berlin, he has 100 active members and a small office. Everything is to build. Goebbels begins by creating a diary, The Angry, the Attack. and to make sure. When people talk about the Nazis, he chooses a radical strategy, arousing hatred. Less. A week after his arrival, Goebbels sends his thugs to challenge the communists in their neighborhoods. A violent fight breaks out. Mass arrests occur. Police bans the Nazi party in the capital of the Reich. But this is of no importance to Goebbels. His movement is fueled by scandal. In this violent climate, Nazi propaganda find a martyr. In 1930, a young militant, Horst Bessel, is stabbed to death by a communist. In the presence of Hitler and Goering, his funeral, filled with great pomp, it becomes a great show of force for the Nazis. And Goebbels does not let to add fuel to the fire. Did he really deserve this death? He was a young German who had the courage to move forward in the midst of the storm with pride and righteousness. To reward him, censorship of Goebbels appoints him head of party propaganda. The third man in Hitler's inner circle does not have the usual profile of workers or the unemployed who join Nazism. Heinrich Himmler is a young bourgeois obsessed with the superiority of the Germanic race. At the party headquarters in Munich in this 1929 propaganda film, Himmler is the young man who wears glasses. He appears once again as a young secretary following the orders of his superiors. His co-religionists do not realize his ambition. Himmler is a young man from a good Catholic family and perfectly integrated into society. He is the son of a Greek and Latin professor, director of one of the most prestigious schools in the city. He doesn't lack anything, but being very young, he joins the most radical racist groups. Katrin Himmler, a political scientist, is Ernst's granddaughter, the younger brother of Heinrich Himmler, and she has dedicated herself to the study of the history of her family. The three Himmler brothers became virulent Nazis. This racist dialectic also exalts the return to the countryside. Himmler becomes an agricultural engineer. He and his wife Marga buy a small farm where they want to live self-sufficiently to protect themselves from the outside world, which they consider putrid. In the presence of Hitler, Himmler appears submissive, but it also exerts a great influence on him. Himmler, the young bourgeois, also believes in Nazi ideas, but he doesn't like to mix with the grassroots militants, who constitute the heart of the party. In response to this, Himmler creates a VIP club within the party. His disciplined men in black form an elite group under his command. The initials are made up of 2 letters, SS. All its members must be of pure Germanic origin. They will be the biggest fans among fans. In 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. And once again, he does not want to work as his position demands of him. Once in power, the distribution of roles among his accomplices generates winners and losers. Goebbels does not immediately become a minister, while Göring triumphs. Hitler places him in his first government in 1933, and no one will accumulate as many charges as him. Just look at the variety of uniforms that he exhibits in his 12 years in power. Marshal of the Empire, an excess of decorations which arouses the jealousy of his great rival, Joseph Goebbels. But Göring is also a strong man. He establishes the dictatorship of 1933. When the Reichstag burns down under mysterious circumstances, Göring, the president of the assembly, he attributes the fire to the communists and resorts to threats. I will remove it with a fire broom. I will bring down all those who have obtained positions and privileges thanks solely to their red and black political affiliation. A wave of repression is hovering over Germany. More than 3,000 opponents of Nazism are imprisoned without trial. Göring establishes a new political police, the Gestapo. In 1934, the first concentration camp was opened in Dachau. Opponents are subjected to forced labor. Göring scores points in Hitler's eyes. He is also a fervent anti-Semite. When the Nazis came to power, Jews only represented 0.8% of the population in Germany. but Goebbels will devise a way to pursue them. Vehicles circulate through the streets transmitting a message. Unlike Goebbels, he is a frequent guest at the Führer's mountain retreat. They both like the same majestic style that has its roots in antiquity. For starters, Speer is the designer of Nuremberg's vast parade ground, inspired by a temple dedicated to Zeus. During party congresses, this area can accommodate more than 340,000 people. Later, Speer built, near the Eiffel Tower, the German pavilion for the Paris exhibition of 1937. That same year, Hitler entrusted him with the project of the century, Germania, the future capital of his empire. This colossal undertaking will be completed in 1950. It involves the reconstruction of Berlin, with a 5-kilometer avenue, Victory Avenue. The Germania buildings will be the largest ever built. At the end of the avenue, a dome reserved for the town's Great Hall will be erected, which will be 16 times larger than St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. This building would have remained the largest in the world until today. For Berliners, it would represent a truly seismic change. And to test the architect's efficiency against him, Hitler presents him with a challenge. Speer must build Germania's first building in just 1 year. 8,000 workers from all over Germany work tirelessly, day and night. They are building the future Reich Chancellery. To satisfy Hitler, Albert Speer delivers the building 2 days before the scheduled date. Hitler takes over his new headquarters, destined to impress ambassadors from around the world, everyone. His chancery is absolutely dazzling, with a marble hall, a huge work studio for Hitler, and galleries twice the size of those in the Palace of Versailles. Albert Speer has surpassed all of his competitors in Hitler's esteem. Meanwhile, in Munich, one of Hitler's historical accomplices, Himmler, has not received ministry. He has only been appointed head of the Bavarian police. Willing to anything, he will carry out a bloody purge within the party, known as the Night of Long Knives. Hitler then fears the power of another leader, Ernst Röhm. Very popular, he heads the SSA, a powerful Nazi militia known for its brown shirts. While under his orders, Himmler oversees the assassination of Röhm and of his entire general staff. And Himmler emerges as the great winner of the bloodbath. The organization of it, the SS, the Black Order, will have no rivals. He will make her more than just a militia. Hitler appoints Göring as his successor. After the death of Karin, his first wife, from cancer, Germans long for a first lady. So her second wedding in Berlin is fit for a monarch. 30,000 soldiers fill the streets. Hitler, his wedding witness, has sponsored this grandiose celebration to hide his own private life. Emma and Hermann Göring become the official couple of the regime. Increasingly, they represent Nazi power on grand occasions, like here at a reception in honor of Mussolini.
At this crucial point in the video, we approach the decisive moment, the fall of the Nazi regime. But before we dive into the final events, I want to remind you that your support is essential. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single detail of this fascinating story, and don't forget to give it a like if you are enjoying the content. Together, we will continue to explore the events that changed the course of history. Now, prepare to witness the last days of Hitler's regime and the triumph of freedom over tyranny.
He had met Göring several times. He had joined the Hitler Youth at a very young age, and at the age of 17 he had been a soldier on Göring's property for several months. Although he occupies the foreground of the scene, Göring has a lot of trouble containing Hitler. The Führer is now ready to declare war. Hitler regularly attends combat rehearsals. Despite these immense deployments, Göring has great trouble containing his impatience, because he knows that the plan to prepare Germany for war is far behind schedule. However, with a year's notice of the plan that he himself had designed, Hitler ordered the attack. For Hitler and his accomplices, entering the war in 1939 is disturbingly easy. The German army seems invincible. After just 1 year of war, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Holland, and France. Half of Europe is falling apart, and the division of the empire among Hitler's accomplices will be bloody. The great looting begins. Goering turns Paris into his hunting ground, arriving in a convertible limousine, traveling through the streets, getting out of the car at Plaza Vendôme, and entering a palace, the Ridge. Goering has arrived to take whatever he wants from the French museums. Matisse, Monet, César. He takes hundreds of paintings to complete his already gigantic collection. The same year, Hitler also arrives in Paris, accompanied by Albert Speer, his architect, and promises to copy the most beautiful monuments of the French capital for the future Germania. The same year, Hitler also arrives in Paris, accompanied by Albert Speer, his architect, and promises to copy the most beautiful monuments of the French capital for the future Germania. Upon his return to Berlin, Marshal Goering enjoys his victory. He directs military operations and yet hides reality from Hitler. For fear of upsetting Hitler, Goering does not tell him anything. And not only that, in an act of bragging, he promises to crush her in just 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Himmler forges an empire in Eastern Europe, where he carries out an aberrant policy of extermination with absolute coldness. When Hitler visits him in Poland, his SS soldiers are already carrying out their great racist war. Himmler spends his time motivating his troops to justify systematic murders. When Hitler visits him in Poland, his SS soldiers are already carrying out their great racist war. Himmler spends his time motivating his troops to justify systematic murders. Starting in 1939 in Poland and 1941 in the USSR, the Nazis experimented with policies of mass murder and deportations. Under Himmler's orders, they build their living space, a colonial empire populated by slaves and freed from the Jews. At the same time, in Ukraine and the Baltic countries, small groups of SS assassins called Einsatzgruppen operate. Atrocities happen at an unbridled pace. More than 1 million people are exterminated by firing squads. In August 1941, Himmler traveled to Minsk, Belarus to evaluate this assassination strategy. He first inspects the Soviet prisoners and personally attends their executions. As inconceivable as it may seem, Himmler, as the great leader of the SS, is only concerned about the psychological traumas that his men may suffer. In 1941, several methods of mass extermination coexist. But at the end of that same year, an order issued by Himmler in person unified the procedures. The Führer demands the extermination of all Jews in Europe. 3 years earlier, he had already warned that if the war became global, he would carry out his threat. The entry of the United States into the war in December 1941 is what ultimately precipitated his decision. For Himmler, the possibility of murdering millions of people through mass shootings is unfeasible. Himmler decides to concentrate all the new extermination policies in one place, a gigantic place, which will become the largest of the concentration camps. A place to which 1,300,000 people will be deported. Himmler entrusts Auschwitz to a camp officer, one of the worst specialists in prison camps. His name is Rudolf Heuss. At the age of 40, he becomes director of one of the most ambitious projects of the Third Reich. These images of Auschwitz that we have seen so many times showed the liberation of the camp in 1945 by Soviet soldiers. To run the largest prison camp in the Nazi Empire, Himmler had the opportunity to choose among many leaders, but he chose Rudolf Heuss, a man with a murderous past. Upon his release from prison, Himmler takes him under his protection and finds him a new profession. When he arrives at Auschwitz in 1940 to establish a prison camp, Hoyes finds a small town of 15,000 inhabitants and a former Polish army barracks where he establishes the first detention area, Auschwitz I, and he also notices a villa attached to the field. Hoyes takes over this house, kicking out its Polish owners. From the window of his office located on the second floor, this direct view of the crematorium does not bother him at all. The commander settles in the villa with his wife Edwidge and his 5 children. The family only thinks about social climbing. These photos attest to their new living conditions, which assure them unexpected comforts. 70 meters from the crematorium ovens, the garden, surrounded by a wall, becomes the children's favorite playground. Thanks to the concentration camp, the Hoyes lead a comfortable life, with slave labor at their service. Like the rest of the SS directors, Hoyes was constantly motivated by Himmler, who recorded his arguments only once, for I. Starting in 1941, Himmler orders Joes to grow Auschwitz to receive a greater number of convoys. The red brick buildings of the old barracks are no longer big enough. 3 kilometers from the first site, the construction of Birkenau begins, a gigantic concentration camp, but also an execution center where deportees are sent as soon as they arrive directly to the gas chambers. Joes also uses prisoners to provide labor for this entire industrial complex. He sets up a large chemical plant there that manufactures rubber for tires. Auschwitz never stops diversifying. After building this huge factory, Joes develops a large agricultural project with Himmler. Joes supervises the construction of these greenhouses, intended for research into new plants. From 1943 onwards, the Werke field did not become immense. The new agricultural center is established in a small village called Reiskow. During the war, Auschwitz became a model city for the Nazis, and its population multiplied by 4. Working alongside Rudolf Heuss, another known Nazi criminal, he also profits from the convoys arriving at Auschwitz. Son of wealthy industrialists, Dr. Josef Mengele carries out medical experiments. Inside the camp and in the medical academies, Nazi doctors performed atrocious mutilations, especially on the bodies of Jewish and Gypsy deportees. And for his experiments, Dr. Mengele specifically needs children. Bye-bye. In this column of young survivors filmed in 1945, 2 twin sisters hold hands in the front row. They are 2 Hungarian Jewish girls, named Miriam and Ava. They are 11 years old. When she arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1944, she along with 5 members of her family. As soon as she gets off the train, Ava must undergo selection, carried out by the SS, who receive the convoys and work for Mengele. Stripped of their belongings, 4 family members are sent to the gas chambers. If Ava and her sister survive, it is only to be used in Dr. Mengele's experiments. Every day, they are taken to the camp medical service that he directs. The injections make Ava fall seriously ill and give her a very high fever. Mengele's experiments with the twins, true acts of torture, play a strategic role for the Nazis. Ava and her sister survive, but suffer all their lives from serious physical deficiencies. 1,100,000 people perish in Auschwitz. But at the end of 1941, Hitler and his accomplices suffered their first setback. Goering considers waging war at the same time in Western and Eastern Europe to be madness. But once again, he does not confront Hitler. But Goering was right. In its campaign against the Soviet Union, the German army had not anticipated the bitter winter cold. The troops are exhausted. In Stalingrad, the casualties are enormous. At that moment, young Dieter goes from the Hitler Youth to the Russian front, where he fights in the German Garen division. The young soldier is only 17 years old. Engaged in multiple battles, the Germans lack the necessary weapons. But Hitler doesn't listen to anyone. Within his closest circle, he looks for an accomplice capable of promising him a miracle. Goering, who had already run the arms industry, is running as a candidate. But Hitler preferred a more motivated collaborator and chose his architect, Albert Speer. Hitler asks him to double the rate of production. From the first moment, Speer is aware of the difficulty of the company. Men are sent to the front and women replace them in factories. Propaganda even persuades them to leave their previous jobs. But these measures are not enough to achieve the exorbitant objectives dictated by Hitler. In addition, Speer is in charge of supervising the development of secret weapons destined to change the course of the war. In particular, the V-1 and V-2 missiles, which have been tested for more than 5 years. These first ballistic missiles in history will be capable of reaching England. Against all odds, he hopes a miracle works. In 1943, while the country is heavily bombed, as here in Hamburg, he manages to double weapons production. The cannons and tanks are manufactured in huge factories, where workers work more than 70 hours a week. But the miracle of him also has a hidden side. In central Germany, in a forested region 150 kilometers from Hanover, a vast project is going to be hidden under this hill. The Nazis conceived a network of galleries of more than 12 kilometers, which crossed the Mittelmadura mountain from side to side. It is accessed through this enormous entrance 7 meters high. An old mine is transformed into an endless succession of tunnels. This labyrinth, made up of 45 inlets, constitutes the largest underground factory in the world, in which workers assemble the famous V-2 missile. And it is also the heart of the system designed by Albert Speer. Thousands of deportees from concentration camps remain locked up day and night working as slaves. Of the 60,000 prisoners in the tunnel, 20,000 lose their lives, including 2,000 French. Albert Speer will always claim to know nothing about the terrible living conditions that made his miracle possible. Hitler considers him an organizational genius and decorates him. Speer's ambition irritates his rivals. Speer's miracle is not enough. The news coming from the Russian front is increasingly catastrophic. 200,000 soldiers are taken prisoner. Goering now physically suffers the weight of defeat. His drug use skyrockets, bloated and glassy-eyed. He weighs more than 120 kilos. And yet, on the Eastern Front, when Marshal Goering inspects the Panzer Division, every soldier must appear unwavering in victory. To stop this lack of motivation, Hitler needs a collaborator capable of rallying the Germans behind him. The time has come for his most fanatical accomplice to regain some of the attention. Berlin Sports Palace, February 18, 1943. Goebbels orchestrates a communications operation. He assembles a crowd of convinced Nazis and wounded soldiers who have returned from the front and is personally responsible for carefully choosing his 14,000 spectators. Goebbels creates a climate of hysteria in Germany. That night, a tranquil Goebbels performs what he himself considers to be the most impressive performance of his career. His eternal rival, Goering, has finally fallen from grace, and he definitively returns to the forefront. Goebbels then displayed extraordinary energy, visiting the victims of the bombed cities, listening to the complaints of the population, handing out medals, and organizing soup kitchens. Goebbels also extends the age of mobilization for all Germans. From now on, he can enlist men up to the age of 60, and the age for younger recruits is reduced to 16 years. New recruits leave for the front in their civilian clothes and with any weapons they can get access to. Goebbels calls the operation the Town Storm. But with a Berlin in ruins, in which the inhabitants are forced to scavenge in the garbage to feed themselves, new news is going to shake the morale of the Nazis. The Allies have just landed in Normandy. Day after day, the collapse of the Reich is taking shape. In this completely devastated room in his headquarters, Hitler has miraculously survived a bomb attack. Around him, there are 4 dead and 9 seriously injured who are visiting the hospital. The attack was organized by senior officers who wanted to negotiate Germany's capitulation with the Allies. This plot against Hitler triggers thousands of arrests, torture, and murders. Esper, Himmler, Gary, Gavers. Now everyone knows what awaits them if they betray Hitler. But each of them will take a very different path. All Hitler's accomplices must follow their Führer, even to the sacrifice of their own lives. And now they are trapped by a Hitler who has completely lost his mind. In March 1945, Hitler works in slow motion. In these propaganda images, Hitler sits in front of a map, in front of petrified generals who do not dare to mention the defeat. April 20th, 1945, Hitler's 56th birthday, is the last time they are filmed together. Gary and Himmler parade with smiling expressions, but everything is pure illusion. Hours later, they hastily abandon Hitler. Because at that moment, staying in Berlin means dying. Soviet soldiers destroy the city with their bombs, which is located under the monumental chancellery. Of his 3 main accomplices, only Goebbels remains hidden with Hitler. On April 21st, as the empire collapses, Joseph Goebbels, the fanatic, addresses the German people in a final message of, on April 30th, 1945, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and with the city taken by the Soviets, Hitler committed suicide. According to his last wishes, he designates Joseph Goebbels as his official successor. But Goebbels is only chancellor for a few hours. When the Soviets arrive at the chancellery, they discover the charred bodies of Joseph and Magda Goebbels, along with the corpses of their 6 children, whom they poisoned before committing suicide. All over Germany, the Allies encounter the same scene: thousands of anonymous Nazis who refuse to surrender and commit family suicide. Unlike Goebbels, Himmler and Göring are willing to negotiate. Göring takes refuge in his residence on the German-Austrian border. Before dying, Hitler dismissed him. The Führer had named him his successor, but on April 23, 1945, Göring had sent him this confidential telegram, in which he offered to replace him. Finally, in May 1945, Göring surrendered to the Americans. His wife and his daughter are placed in custody. Göring is still convinced that he can negotiate an honorable surrender. He is a marshal, the highest military rank, but they announce that he will be treated like a criminal. Hitler is also betrayed by his faithful Heinrich Himmler. The head of the SS has fled. Since February 1945, to save his head, Himmler secretly contacts the Allies to negotiate capitulation. He even authorizes the entry of these Red Cross buses to save more than 13,000 prisoners that he has freed from the camps. When he realizes that his position is not credible, he hides among the common soldiers who have been taken prisoner. He wants to disappear into the crowd disguised under a false identity. Finally, recognized near Hamburg, and while an English doctor searches them in this house, Himmler dyes a cyanide capsule that he hides in his mouth. He dies instantly. The murderer of the century will never be held accountable. That same day in Flensburg, in northern Germany, the last-born leaders are arrested. Among them are Hitler's protege Albert Speer, the architect and Minis. In the summer of 1945, among Hitler's accomplices, only Göring and Esper remain alive. At the bottom of the pecking order, Joyce has also survived. They will all have to answer for their crimes in court, and they still think they can get out alive. On November 20th, 1945, in the city of Nuremberg, the trial of the century begins. These American, English, Russian, and French judges will be in charge of judging the 24 Nazi criminals still alive. They all face the death penalty, and for the first time in history, they will have to answer for a new crime: crimes against humanity. Defendant number 1 is German Göring. Thinner and cured of his drug addiction, he appears particularly combative. After him, all the accused in turn plead not guilty. Of the trial, Göring takes center stage. He still thinks that with his strategy he can avoid the death penalty. He wants to defend Hitler's plan for Germany. But the judges have planned an electroshock. Nazi criminals must face in court the shocking images filmed during the liberation of the camps, images filmed by the Americans and the Russians to bear eternal testimony to the atrocities organized by the accused. During the screening, Göring looked away. He realizes his defense is crumbling. The chilling testimony of Rudolf Heuss, the commandant of the Auschwitz camp, will sink the accused even further. Accused. At Nuremberg, everyone defends the Nazi regime to the end. All except one who denies his convictions and pretends not to know anything about the Holocaust. Despite being one of Hitler's closest collaborators, Albert Speer, the architect. On October 1, 1946, after 10 months of trial in Nuremberg, the court handed down its sentence. 12 defendants are sentenced to death by hanging. The strategy bears fruit. He is sentenced to 20 years in prison. Göring does not want to be hanged like a common criminal, but rather to die like a soldier shot by a firing squad. The court denies it. Then, as a last provocation, a few hours before the execution of the sentence, with the help of one of his American guards, Göring procures a poison capsule and commits suicide in his cell, still convinced that he has left his mark on history. The Auschwitz officials are handed over to Polish justice, since their atrocities have been committed on their territory. Among them, Rudolf Heuss, the director of the Auschwitz camp, is tried in Warsaw and sentenced to set an example by being hanged in the camp at the scene of his crimes. The years go by. Of Hitler's Praetorian Guard, only one man remains alive and will become a master in the art of lying. In 1966, when he leaves Spandau prison in the suburbs of Berlin, Albert Speer is only 61 years old. Hitler's architect and minister attracts media attention around the world. After 20 years in prison, he is the only one who can tell, from within, the functioning of power under Hitler's command. Speer continues to present himself as an architect who was unaware of the worst crimes committed by the regime. But in the 1970s, Speer was gradually cornered by revelations about his involvement in the Holocaust. In particular, we know, thanks to this photo, that in 1943 he visited the Mauthausen camp, where more than 200,000 people died, and that he heard Himmler comment on the extermination of the Jews. Albert Speer will escape the truth until the end. Hitler's last close collaborator died in his bed of a heart attack. Hitler's last close collaborator died in his bed of a heart attack in 1981. Joseph Mengele, the Auschwitz doctor, nicknamed the Angel of Death, died in 1979 in Brazil, without ever having faced justice. None of these major criminals who perpetrated unspeakable atrocities during World War II could be brought to justice for their horrific acts. Despite efforts to capture and prosecute them, some managed to escape accountability and lived out their final days in impunity. His dark legacy remains a grim reminder of the horrors of the past and the importance of learning from them to ensure they are never repeated.
And so, we conclude this exciting journey through World War II. I hope this tour has been informative and eye-opening for all of you. Always remember to learn from history to build a better future. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and see you in the next video. See you soon.